Welcome to a Fireside Reading of David Copperfield by Charles Dickens, Chapter 45, Mr. Dick Fulfills My Aunt's Predictions. It was some time now since I had left the doctor. Living in his neighborhood, I saw him frequently, and we all went to his house on 2 or 3 occasions to dinner or tea. The old soldier was in permanent quarters under the doctor's roof. She was exactly the same as ever, and the same immortal butterflies hovered over her cap. Like some other mothers whom I have known in the course of my life, Mrs. Markleham was far more fond of pleasure than her daughter was. She required a great deal of amusement, and like a deep old soldier, pretended, in consulting her own inclinations, to be devoting herself to her child. The doctor's desire that Annie should be entertained was therefore particularly acceptable to this excellent parent, who expressed unqualified approval of his discretion. I have no doubt, indeed, that she probed the doctor's wound without knowing it. Meaning nothing but a certain matured frivolity and selfishness, not always inseparable from full-blown years, I think she confirmed him in his fear that he was a constraint upon his young wife, and that there was no congeniality of feeling between them, by so strongly commending his design of lightening the load of her life. "My dear soul," she said to him one day when I was present, "you know there is no doubt it would be a little poky for Annie to be always shut up here." The doctor nodded his benevolent head. "When she comes to her mother's age," said Mrs. Markleham with a flourish of her fan, "then it'll be another thing, but you might put me into a jail with genteel society and a rubber, and I should never care to come out. But I am not Annie, you know, and Annie is not her mother." Surely, said the doctor. "You are the best of creatures. No, I beg your pardon," for the doctor made a gesture of deprecation. "I must say before your face, as I always say behind your back, you are the best of creatures. But of course you don't, now do you, enter into the same pursuits and fancies as Annie?" "No," said the doctor in a sorrowful tone. "No, of course not," retorted the old soldier. "Take your dictionary, for example. What a useful work a dictionary is! What a necessary work! The meaning of words. Without Dr. Johnson or somebody of that sort, we might have been at this present moment calling an Italian iron a bedstead. But we can't expect a dictionary, especially when it's making, to interest Annie, can we?" The doctor shook his head. "And that's why I so much approve," said Mrs. Markleham, tapping him on the shoulder with her shut-up fan, "of your thoughtfulness. It shows that you don't expect, as many elderly people do expect, old heads on young shoulders. You have studied Annie's character, and you understand it. That's what I find so charming." Even the calm and patient face of Dr. Strong expressed some little sense of pain, I thought, under the infliction of these compliments. "Therefore, my dear doctor," said the old soldier, giving him several affectionate taps, "you may command me at all times and seasons. Now, do understand that I am entirely at your service. I am ready to go with Annie to operas, concerts, exhibitions, all kinds of places, and you shall never find that I am tired. Duty, my dear doctor, before every consideration in the universe." She was as good as her word. She was one of those people who can bear a great deal of pleasure, and she never flinched in her perseverance in the cause. She seldom got hold of the newspaper, which she settled herself down in the softest chair in the house to read through an eyeglass every day for 2 hours, but she found out something that she was certain Annie would like to see. It was in vain for Annie to protest that she was weary of such things. Her mother's remonstrance always was, "Now, my dear Annie, I am sure you know better, and I must tell you, my love, that you are not making a proper return for the kindness of Dr. Strong." This was usually said in the doctor's presence, and appeared to me to constitute Annie's principal inducement for withdrawing her objections when she made any. But in general she resigned herself to her mother and went where the old soldier would. It rarely happened now that Mr. Malden accompanied them. Sometimes my aunt and Dora were invited to do so, and accepted the invitation. Sometimes Dora only was asked. The time had been when I should have been uneasy in her going, but reflection on what had passed that former night in the doctor's study had made a change in my mistrust. I believed that the doctor was right, and I had no worse suspicions. My aunt rubbed her nose sometimes when she happened to be alone with me, and said she couldn't make it out. She wished they were happier. She didn't think our military friend, so she always called the old soldier, mended the matter at all. My aunt further expressed her opinion that if our military friend would cut off those butterflies and give them to the chimney sweepers for May Day, it would look like the beginning of something sensible on her part. But her abiding reliance was on Mr. Dick. That man had evidently an idea in his head, she said, and if he could only once pen it up into a corner, which was his great difficulty, he would distinguish himself in some extraordinary manner. Unconscious of this prediction, Mr. Dick continued to occupy precisely the same ground in reference to the doctor and Mrs. Strong. He seemed neither to advance nor to recede. He appeared to have settled into his original foundation like a building, and I must confess that my faith in his ever moving was not much greater than if he had been a building. But one night, when I had been married some months, Mr. Dick put his head into the parlour where I was writing alone, Dora having gone out with my aunt to take tea with the two little birds, and said with a significant cough, "You wouldn't speak to me without inconveniencing yourself, Trotwood, I am certain." "Certainly, Mr. Dick," I said. "Come in." "Trotwood," said Mr. Dick, laying his finger on the side of his nose after he had shaken hands with me, "before I sit down, I wish to make an observation. You know your aunt?" "A little," I replied. "She is the most wonderful woman in the world, sir." After the delivery of this communication, which he shot out of himself as if he were loaded with it, Mr. Dick sat down with greater gravity than usual and looked at me. "Now, boy," said Mr. Dick, "I am going to put a question to you." "As many as you please," said I. "What do you consider me, sir?" asked Mr. Dick, folding his arms. "A dear old friend," said I. "Thank you, Trotwood," returned Mr. Dick, laughing and reaching across in high glee to shake hands with me. "But I mean, boy," resuming his gravity, "what do you consider me in this respect?" touching his forehead. I was puzzled how to answer, but he helped me with a word. "Weak?" said Mr. Dick. "Well," I replied dubiously, Rather so. Exactly, cried Mr. Dick, who seemed quite enchanted by the reply. That is, Trotwood, when they took some of the trouble out of you-know-whose head and put it you-know-where, there was a... Mr. Dick made his two hands revolve very fast about each other a great number of times, and then brought them together into a collision and rolled them over and over one another to express confusion. There was that sort of thing done to me, somehow, eh? I nodded at him, and he nodded back again. In short, boy, said Mr. Dick, dropping his voice to a whisper, I am simple. I would have qualified that conclusion, but he stopped me. Yes, I am. She pretends I am not. She won't hear of it, but I am. I know I am. If she hadn't stood my friend, sir, I should have been shut up to lead a dismal life these many years. But I'll provide for her. I never spend the copying money. I put it in a box. I have made a will. I'll leave it all to her. She shall be rich, noble. Mr. Dick took out his pocket handkerchief and wiped his eyes. He then folded it up with great care, pressed it smooth between his two hands, put it in his pocket, and seemed to put my aunt away with it. Now, you are a scholar, Trotwood, said Mr. Dick. You are a fine scholar. You know what a learned man, what a great man the doctor is. You know what honour he has always done me. Not proud in his wisdom, humble, condescending even to poor Dick, who is simple and knows nothing. I have sent his name up on a scrap of paper to the kite along the string when it has been in the sky among the larks. The kite has been glad to receive it, sir, and the sky has been brighter with it. I delighted him by saying most heartily that the doctor was deserving of our best respect and highest esteem. And his beautiful wife is a star, said Mr. Dick, a shining star. I have seen her shine, sir. But, bringing his chair nearer and laying one hand upon my knee, clouds, sir. Clouds. I answered the solicitude which his face expressed by conveying the same expression into my own and shaking my head. What clouds? Said Mr. Dick. He looked so wistfully into my face and was so anxious to understand that I took great pains to answer him slowly and distinctly, as I might have entered on an explanation to a child. There is some unfortunate division between them, I replied. Some unhappy cause of separation. A secret. It may be inseparable from the discrepancy in their years. It may have grown up out of almost nothing. Mr. Dick, who had told off every sentence with a thoughtful nod, paused when I had done and sat considering, with his eyes upon my face and his hand upon my knee. Doctor not angry with her, Trotwood? He said after some time. No, devoted to her. Then I have got it, said Mr. Dick. The sudden exultation with which he slapped me on the knee and leaned back in his chair with his eyebrows lifted up as high as he could possibly lift them made me think him farther out of his wits than ever. He became as suddenly grave again, and leaning forward as before, said, first respectfully taking out his pocket handkerchief, as if it really did represent my aunt.
"Most wonderful woman in the world, Trotwood. Why has she done nothing to set things right?"
"Too delicate and difficult a subject for such interference," I replied.
"Fine scholar," said Mr. Dick, touching me with his finger. "Why has he done nothing?"
"For the same reason," I returned.
"Then I have got it, boy," said Mr. Dick, and he stood up before me, more exultingly than before, nodding his head and striking himself repeatedly upon the breast, until one might have supposed that he had nearly nodded and struck all the breath out of his body. "A poor fellow with a craze, sir," said Mr. Dick. "A simpleton, a weak-minded person, present company, you know," striking himself again, "may do what wonderful people may not do. I'll bring them together, boy. I'll try. They'll not blame me. They'll not object to me. They'll not mind what I do if it's wrong. I'm only Mr. Dick. And who minds Dick? Dick's nobody. Poof!" He blew a slight contemptuous breath, as if he blew himself away.
It was fortunate he had proceeded so far with his mystery, for we heard the coach stop at the little garden gate, which brought my aunt and Dora home.
"Not a word, boy," he pursued in a whisper. "Leave all the blame with Dick. Simple Dick. Mad Dick. I've been thinking, sir, for some time that I was getting it, and now I have got it. After what you've said to me, I'm sure I've got it all right."
Not another word did Mr. Dick utter on the subject, but he made a very telegraph of himself for the next half hour, to the great disturbance of my aunt's mind, to enjoin inviolable secrecy on me. To my surprise, I heard no more about it for some 2 or 3 weeks, though I was sufficiently interested in the result of his endeavours, descrying a strange gleam of good sense, I say nothing of good feeling, for that he always exhibited, in the conclusion to which he had come. At last I began to believe that in the flighty and unsettled state of his mind, he had either forgotten his intention or abandoned it. One fair evening, when Dora was not inclined to go out, my aunt and I strolled up to the doctor's cottage. It was autumn, when there were no debates to vex the evening air, and I remember how the leaves smelt like our garden at Blunderston, as we trod them underfoot, and how the old, unhappy feeling seemed to go by on the sighing wind. It was twilight when we reached the cottage. Mrs. Strong was just coming out of the garden, where Mr. Dick yet lingered, busy with his knife, helping the gardener to point some stakes. The doctor was engaged with someone in his study, but the visitor would be gone directly, Mrs. Strong said, and begged us to remain and see him. We went into the drawing-room with her and sat down by the darkening window. There was never any ceremony about the visits of such old friends and neighbours as we were. We had not sat here many minutes when Mrs. Markleham, who usually contrived to be in a fuss about something, came bustling in with her newspaper in her hand and said, out of breath, "My goodness gracious, Annie, why didn't you tell me there was someone in the study?" "My dear mamma," she quietly returned, "how could I know that you desired the information?"
"Desired the information?" said Mrs. Markleham, sinking on the sofa. "I never had such a turn in all my life."
"Have you been to the study, then, mamma?" asked Annie.
"Been to the study, my dear," she returned emphatically. "Indeed I have. I came upon the amiable creature if you'll imagine my feelings, Miss Trotwood and David, in the act of making his will. Her daughter looked round from the window quickly. In the act, my dear Annie, repeated Mrs. Markleham, spreading the newspaper on her lap like a tablecloth and patting her hands upon it, of making his last will and testament. The foresight and affection of the dear. I must tell you how it was. I really must, in justice to the darling, for he is nothing less, tell you how it was. Perhaps you know, Miss Trotwood, that there is never a candle lighted in this house until one's eyes are literally falling out of one's head with being stretched to read the paper, and that there is not a chair in this house in which a paper can be what I call read, except one in the study. This took me to the study, where I saw a light. I opened the door. In company with the dear doctor were two professional people, evidently connected with the law, and they were all three standing at the table, the darling doctor, pen in hand. This simply expresses then, said the doctor, Annie, my love, attend to the very words. This simply expresses then, gentlemen, the confidence I have in Mrs. Strong, and gives her all unconditionally. One of the professional people replied, and gives her all unconditionally. Upon that, with the natural feelings of a mother, I said, Good God, I beg your pardon, fell over the doorstep and came away through the little back passage where the pantry is. Mrs. Strong opened the window and went out into the veranda, where she stood leaning against a pillar. But now, isn't it, Miss Trotwood, isn't it, David, invigorating, said Mrs. Markleham, mechanically following her with her eyes, to find a man of Dr. Strong's time of life with the strength of mind to do this kind of thing? It only shows how right I was. I said to Annie when Dr. Strong paid a very flattering visit to myself, and made her the subject of a declaration and an offer, I said, My dear, there is no doubt whatever in my opinion with reference to a suitable provision for you that Dr. Strong will do more than he binds himself to do. Here the bell rang, and we heard the sound of the visitors' feet as they went out. It's all over, no doubt, said the old soldier after listening. The dear creature has signed, sealed, and delivered, and his mind's at rest. Well, it may be. What a mind! Annie, my love, I am going to the study with my paper, for I am a poor creature without news. Miss Trotwood, David, pray come and see the doctor. I was conscious of Mr. Dix standing in the shadow of the room, shutting up his knife when we accompanied her to the study, and of my aunt's rubbing her nose violently by the way as a mild vent for her intolerance of our military friend. But who got first into the study, or how Mrs. Markleham settled herself in a moment in her easy-chair, or how my aunt and I came to be left together near the door, unless her eyes were quicker than mine and she held me back, I have forgotten, if I ever knew. But this I know, that we saw the doctor, before he saw us, sitting at his table, among the folio volumes in which he delighted, resting his head calmly on his hand. That in the same moment we saw Mrs. Strong glide in, pale and trembling, that Mr. Dick supported her on his arm, that he laid his other hand upon the doctor's arm, causing him to look up with an abstracted air, that as the doctor moved his head, his wife dropped down on one knee at his feet, and with her hands imploringly lifted, fixed upon his face the memorable look I had never forgotten.
that at this sight Mrs. Markleham dropped the newspaper and stared, more like a figurehead intended for a ship to be called the Astonishment than anything else I can think of. The gentleness of the doctor's manner and surprise, the dignity that mingled with the supplicating attitude of his wife, the amiable concern of Mr. Dick, and the earnestness with which my aunt said to herself, "That man mad," triumphantly expressive of the misery from which she had saved him, I see and hear, rather than remember, as I write about it. "Doctor," said Mr. Dick, "what is it that's amiss? Look here."
"Annie," cried the doctor, "not at my feet, my dear."
"Yes," she said, "I beg and pray that no one will leave the room. Oh, my husband and father, break this long silence. Let us both know what it is that has come between us." Mrs. Markleham, by this time recovering the power of speech and seeming to swell with family pride and motherly indignation, here exclaimed, "Annie, get up immediately, and don't disgrace everybody belonging to you by humbling yourself like that, unless you wish to see me go out of my mind on the spot." "Mamma," returned Annie, "waste no words on me, for my appeal is to my husband, and even you are nothing here." "Nothing?" exclaimed Mrs. Markleham. "Me? Nothing? The child has taken leave of her senses. Please to get me a glass of water." I was too attentive to the doctor and his wife to give any heed to this request, and it made no impression on anybody else. So Mrs. Markleham panted, stared, and fanned herself.
"Annie," said the doctor, tenderly taking her in his hands, "my dear, if any unavoidable change has come in the sequence of time upon our married life, you are not to blame. The fault is mine, and only mine. There is no change in my affection, admiration, and respect. I wish to make you happy. I truly love and honor you. Rise, Annie, pray."
But she did not rise. After looking at him for a little while, she sank down closer to him, laid her arm across his knee, and dropping her head upon it, said, "If I have any friend here who can speak one word for me or for my husband in this matter, if I have any friend here who can give voice to any suspicion that my heart has sometimes whispered to me, if I have any friend here who honors my husband, or has ever cared for me, and has anything within his knowledge, no matter what it is, that may help to mediate between us, I implore that friend to speak." Sorry to do that to you. That's exactly halfway through the chapter, and we'll have the second part of chapter 45 tomorrow, where somebody does speak. Guess who? We'll find out tomorrow at 5 Pacific at Fireside Reading on Instagram, live, all the chapters uploaded to the YouTube channel of Fireside Reading, where you can subscribe and comment and like if you do. Until I see you all tomorrow, please stay very well. Good night.